I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P, and here we have one of those occasional editorials I mentioned before. I want you to do a little bit of an experiment. I want you to go to Google Images and I want you to type in the search bar, kids movies. Now I do encourage that you use a new computer or log off your Gmail account, since it's best to have a clear history when looking this up. And then I want you to see the list. You'll most likely find a list of animated movies that aren't necessarily kids movies. What does that say? Why is our perception in the West that animation is made for kids? Why it has to be this kids-only genre? Frankly, I don't want it to be viewed like that, but to keep this from being a short editorial part rant, let's go ahead and talk about it. Now you might notice that the title focuses on Western animation, as Japan's market is evenly distributed with adult-oriented and kid-centric animated movies. However, I won't focus on anime or other Eastern animation in this editorial. Eastern European probably, but I don't feel as if I have the experience or enthusiasm to fully discuss the area of animation. It doesn't mean I hate anime, I just don't think I'm ready to discuss it yet in full detail. Animation is one of the different techniques to make a movie. If anything, it has more diversity than live action when you consider different ways artists can express their story through computer-generated imagery, hand-drawn, or stop-motion puppetry. I didn't even mention how real-time puppetry can be considered as a type of unconventional animation that isn't dictated by a frame-by-frame process, or how motion capture, rotoscope, or types of film manipulation count towards the spectrum of animation. Much like my last editorial, animation can be hard to define, and to simply define it as a genre can easily be debunked. More specifically, a quote-unquote genre is a type of story or defined by the way it's told. Certain genres would have similarity in format, style, or subject matter. Even more interesting is how genres combine with other styles to make cross-hybrids with one another. Think about it. Aliens is famous for being a sci-fi movie set in space. However, the monster that slowly kills the crew members one by one should technically define it as a horror film set in space. Either way, you can get away with calling Aliens a horror, sci-fi, or all the above. Me personally, I view it as a comedy. Just look how that alien jumps out of his chest.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
The problem with how animation is defined as a genre is because, all too often, a vast majority is telling the same story. Folks, let's be honest, this year was not a good year for animation. We start off the year with Escape from Planet Earth, a PG-rated sci-fi comedy where the young protagonist overcomes obstacles to save his brother and be a hero. Flash forward another month or two, and we have The Croods, a caveman comedy where a family overcomes obstacles in order to learn how to survive the new changing world. Alright. Epic is another G-rated sci-fi fantasy with some comedy where, lo and behold, another young protagonist learns to overcome obstacles and yada yada yada. The sad thing is that those are just 3 of the vast majority of the films that came out that year that are safe for your kids, featuring some variations of the same story, and each threw in some forced humor, and chances are it ain't going away. Even last year, as much as I praised the movie Paranorman, I have to admit that the trend was similar. Films that adults, but children in particular, would enjoy young heroes overcoming obstacles, and some lowbrow humor thrown into the mix. Let's not also forget that there's a difference between a movie that's made for the whole family to enjoy like The Lion King, between a film made to entertain young children alone like A Troll in Central Park. But at the end of the day, both types of movies are safe for your kids, and children were the intended demographic. Even though one focuses mostly on being entertained for the children, the other that's open to family is also considering if it's something children can handle. After a while, you can't help but notice the style, format, and subject matter are being generalized. Or should I say, generalized. This is something of which I didn't think hinged on the qualities of the films, but that overall, the films that being made for the screens getting most of the marketing are the kid-friendly movies. Interesting enough, they can vary between westerns, science fictions, and even horror, but as like any story, can also be argued about the other styles that it's trying to go in favor for. Now I know as soon as I bring up Western animation that's made for kids and not for adults, you're instantly gonna start typing out titles like Waltz with Bashir, Chico and Rita, The Illusionist, or any of Ralph Bakshi's movies. But here's the thing I want you to go over and think about when you're writing them down. Number 1, did you or anybody else see those movies? And number 2, if you did, were they easy to come across initially with wide releases for distribution? And number 3, all because they were made for adults, did that technically make them better than the kid-centric animated movies? I think the one exception to these 3 things were the Fritz the Cat, since it's considered the highest grossing X-rated, or R-rated right now, animated movie. Though we could probably owe it to the time, where ultra-violent and sensual movies were the norm. Also, it's always subjective to say what makes a good movie. However, as much as I like Chico and Rita, a movie aimed for a more mature audience, Kung Fu Panda 2 came out that year, and I found it to be a wonderful sequel and film on its own right. But the big defining factor is that unlike Chico and Rita, you can easily take characteristics about Kung Fu Panda 2 and categorize it in the kid-friendly style of storytelling that's seemingly popular in animation. This is something of which Brad Bird mentioned in his piece on why animation wasn't a genre, mentioning that the popularity of those in the family genre were based on good storytelling and technique. Just think about 8 Crazy Nights, a movie clearly aimed for teenagers and young adults, but failed since it was a mess story-wise. Just recently, Scott Mendelson brought this up in a piece on why the films were taking up the glut of the box office, and that it isn't fairly distributed between other animated movies that tried to explore different avenues. Chances are, Hayao Miyazaki's last movie will be released in the States and not make as much money as something like Despicable Me 2, even during Oscar season. So even though it seems like the kids' movies dominate the box office, as well as the majority's perception of animation in the West, does that really disclude any of the adult-oriented medium out there? I don't think so. There's some very good stuff on television. In fact, there are audiences for shows like The Simpsons, Archer, Family Guy, and South Park to name a few. A selective few. There are cartoons that tell different stories and alternatives from the kid-friendly animation in theaters. Or we don't even have to look far for animated shorts by Harry Partridge or Eagle Raptor that rely heavily on dark humor that most kids will be turned off from. One last counter-argument I like to make in defense of animated movies in the theaters, and from the comments section of my last editorial might cause some eye-rolling, comes from a recent science fiction film called Gravity. Here's a film by definition relies heavily on CG imagery for the majority of the film, rarely focusing on the live-action portions. One might say it's more animated or just as animated as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but using a different technique as opposed to hand-drawn animation. Remember, if the Academy of Motion Pictures and Science counts this as an animated film, frankly we can include Gravity in the realm as well. So yes, I still firmly believe on a whole that animation is a medium on its own right, with different genres for storytelling. However, more specifically, culture and history shapes what genres will strive on what formats. The more I think about it, the first studio to produce mainstream animated movies were Disney, and they started off with a string of successful movies that dealt with children's stories. Contrary to what you might think, but Fantasia was a movie that took more risks, gearing away from the family-centric audience, and originally didn't profit at the box office. Granted, it will give back the film with improved surround sound systems for theaters, but what was fact was that it didn't bring in the dough like Snow White or Bambi. The same could be said for the primetime animated shows, and why they appeal to adults. What we do know is that the first primetime animated show was The Flintstones. Granted, it was a parody of The Honeymooners, but it was a primetime animated show aimed for adults that would pave the way for other shows to follow. Which is probably why it's not that hard to find an animated show trying to screw with senses since it's a gradual progression to get where it was today. Finally, with Avatar, we saw one of the biggest box office hits that surpassed James Cameron's previous film Titanic. The notion that it's safe that CG-heavy movies made way for more successful films like Gravity. Much like Snow White, Avatar could have been the start of something fresh, for animation being expected less as a genre in the States, but a way that can even out the choice and variability in the box office. But who knows? If the quality of these films don't hold up to their potential, it could end up like the movies that followed Fritz the Cat, and just be a temporary trend. So until the day we see animation viewed less as, oh, this must be good for my kids, to, well, this is definitely going to be good for me, I would like to know what you think about the subject matter. Comment below and let me know. Now I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P and thanks for watching.
Began to show.